This is not the truth. The truth, by definition, is far more complicated and real in a sense than the conscious mind can comprehend. So what I do with things such as this diagram is illuminate a part of the truth that is necessary to bring part of our human experience into a language that the human ego within our culture can grasp and understand. So it's not true, but it's useful. And it is more true than nothing at all, than leaving these dynamics to unconsciousness and having them run our lives. So one of the things that is very important to understand is the inner age. So I'm 45, down here is birth. So we've got 45 inner ages. If we look at a tree, for example, it starts with the first year, and then each ring is another year. But the tree doesn't hollow out, meaning that the tree is not a narrow membrane. Within the spiral of time is contained all of the past biology and memory. And there is a connection between consciousness and biology, between memory and consciousness, between memory and biology, meaning the energetic charges, the electrical charges, the chemistry formation in the body registers all past events in our history in such a way that the consciousness can interact with those molecule structures, with those chemical structures, with those muscle tensions, with those different, frankly, I do not know my biology well enough to articulate this as, with as much distinction as I would like. And it's that much harder by the fact that there is no one within the scientific community that has been able to prove where memory is located in the body. Some say the chaotic area of DNA. Others suggest, it's the patterns of different kind of nucleic acids and things like that. We thought we could locate it in the brain, but then it turns out there's a few people that have like 98% of their brain dead and underwater, and you wouldn't know that they were any different from you and I. So obviously that kind of puts a little bit of a dent, unless you could say that memory is in the dead underwater area of the brain. Nevertheless, the mental body, the emotional body, the physical body, one way of looking at them is at different octaves of the same frequency. Rupert Sheldrake populates the idea of field consciousness in a sense that the memory is actually in the consciousness field, and that the body is simply interacted with more like a TV as opposed to something else, which would explain why, even if you have a very tiny bit of the brain left, moment by moment feedback is sent from the consciousness field to that portion of the brain, and it's still enough for people to be conscious of the full range of memory. That being as it is, I started noticing in dating that the women I was dating were not the actual ages of their body, and that this age moved around all the time. So I started calling it the emotional age. And I found it incredibly useful, meaning my marriage would not be alive and well today if I didn't have this filter for understanding who I was dealing with. Because there are certain crazy things that my wife does that if I thought that she was a grown-up, mature woman intentionally annoying me with those things, I would have a fit. But invariably, when I ask her, how old are you inside at the moment, those things that drive me crazy turn out to be done by an emotionally 4-year-old. And when I ask further, why is your 3-year-old, your 5-year-old, etc., coming out in this way, she invariably has some connection to some event in the past, such as, well, when I'm 3 years old and I say this, everyone tells me to shush up and I'm not welcome because I'm too young, or my mom hits me because I did this and that and the other. And then if I want to deal with an adult woman again, I have to spend time helping the 3-year-old, the 5-year-old, the 6-year-old understand, first of all, that that is not happening right at this moment. And second of all, that there's a new environment. So that even though they're feeling that I would actually like to hear what she has to say. And I'm not going to hit her if she says something. Even if it's something that I don't want to hear, I'd like to hear what I don't want to hear more than I'd like to hear silence or, some white lie. And so this is a process of navigating through the traumas of childhood to return to an adult age. If this is not done, then I continue to abuse a 3-year-old emotionally who does not have the ability to navigate now any more than they did at 3 years old in an overwhelming traumatic environment. And so the reason this is so important to me is that, first of all, within this paradigm, we can understand that there are things that we might ask of a partner of one another that would be completely out of line to ask of a 3-year-old. Secondly, it doesn't matter how big the body is. We have Down syndrome children with perfectly grown-up bodies that aren't even 2 years old, or maybe 3 or 4 years old emotionally, and having tantrums, etc. And it's completely abusive to ask a Down syndrome child to be responsible in the way that an adult with an adult psychology would be responsible. And so the key to empathy and understanding is to understand the inner emotional age of the person you're dealing with. And to understand the mechanism by which they are not consciously in control of the inner emotional age that they are at, that rather, within the paradigm of trauma, there is a process of going through life and experiencing an energy. Let's say you're 5 years old, and so here you are at 5 years old. If at 5 years old you experience a hostile energy that dwarfs you in size, first of all, that seems to threaten survival, second of all, and thirdly, does not have any protection, meaning if your father or your mother is the giant, which every parent is to a 5-year-old, and therefore there's not only no protection, but they are actually the aggressor, the small structure of the energy field of the 5-year-old psyche, the 5-year-old body, cannot absorb 5 times its energy coming from the parent. And so it, first of all, will seek attunement. Every baby seeks to attune to the parent through the empathic regions of the brain. If the parent lacks the humility, the empathy, the time, the willingness, the skill to attune to the child's mass and size, they will continue with the giant energy in relationship with the small energy. And as a giant, will present a traumatic threat to the empathic regions of the brain that basically says, I could be killed, I could die here, and nobody's going to listen to me. Once that message gets processed with the brain, the reptilian brain of fight, flight, freeze engages and either fights, flights, or freezes, but in all cases dissociates from the empathic part of the brain. Whatever happens in that domain, maybe the father beats you, maybe the mother shames you publicly, etc., that energy that is bigger than the child can digest gets dissociated out of the conscious ego. It gets dissociated out of consciousness and frozen in place. And it gets frozen in place at a certain intensity or mass. So we could call this like 400. Now, if the child can process 10 units of energy easily and gets hit with a 400 mass of energy, it just completely overwhelms the conscious mind, the ego. It dissociates. Now, it dissociates with triggers of smell, pattern, tone, appearance, basically all the senses. So you can have a, quote, grown person who forgets something, and it was really important. So you get irritated. That was important to me. Okay, so that particular tone, if that was the tone of the giant to the 5-year-old that never got integrated, that particular tone, that could have been a 400-pound weight, because the tone then led to violence, led to this, led to that, led to the child believing that their life was in danger. If that has not been integrated and disseminated within the psyche and the body, then the tone can serve as a trigger for the age in which the tone was most terrifying. So then the 45-year-old woman zips back to this point where she now feels 5 years old in relationship to 400 pounds of tone, and she can only at 5 years old process 10, and she freezes and feels completely helpless and unloved and terrified. This is, of course, maddening to the still grown-up person whose thing was forgotten, because rather than saying, you're absolutely right, I apologize, I've done this a few times, and how would you like me to make it up for you? I mean, it's like, would you like me to take you out to dinner? Shall I drive right back and get that tone? This is on me. I'm an adult. I understand your anger, and I will take responsibility by responding. Well, this, of course, makes the, well, thank you. Great. That's what I like to hear, and don't worry about it. The issue is over. But, of course, the issue is not over when you communicate the angry comment that they forgot something really important and that's going to affect this and this and this. It could affect a career, an interview, all kinds of things. And the person freezes at 5 years old and says, I didn't do it. And it's like, oh my God, what the fuck? You didn't do it. You just said you did it. And you go into the tone at a deeper level. This is now a 5-year-old expecting to be punished by a giant. And they are desperate for reassurance at the very point that you'd like to kill them, which of course reminds them that they could be killed by that giant. And so they dissociate again and go numb, and these parts of the inner ages start dissociating and disowning from the relationship. Meaning, a few cycles of that ending in shame and bitterness in a fight means that the 5-year-old in my partner no longer wants anything to do with me. I'm going to kill him as soon as I get the chance, and they're terrified of me. Well, of course, the 5-year-old has a lot of curiosity, has a lot of energy, has a lot of innocence, has a lot of bonding ability, but no more. The 5-year-old is trapped in the sociopathic region of the brain, the fight, flight, freeze, is terrified of me because I'm a giant who's going to kill him if I get the chance. And the more they behave as if I'm a giant that's going to kill him if I get the chance, the more I feel like I want to kill him because it's not me. It's like, where's my fucking adult? Which, of course, reinforces the wound. So this is a cycle of violation for endless couples in this dynamic. And the thing to understand is that our culture is doing a terrible job in this domain. We routinely banish, punish, shame, traumatize, and threaten 5-year-olds for whatever it is they're acting out of their fear to such a point that they dissociate it, one, and having dissociated from their feelings and a big part of their energy, we tell them that if they come back that way, they are not welcome, that we hate them, that we want nothing to do with them, because this is what incompetent and juvenile parents do to their children when they don't understand psychology. So now the child is stuck with a 400-pound weight on their body with the clear message that if they talk about it in any way whatsoever, the parent's going to hit them and give them another 200 pounds to carry. And they can't take it anymore. And so they go numb, they start lying, they start entering a traumatic state, and basically become afraid of the truth in a variety of ways. So then when you as the grown-up adult say, what's going on? Of course, with some great impatience, because first, you've had the important thing forgotten. Second, you've got a frozen denial that's insane. And third, you've got what seems like an irritating baby that's stuck there looking at you as if you're ruining their life. And it's like, if it's such a big fucking deal with you, bring the thing next time. And then they get even more scared and they won't tell you what's going on. And you know exactly what you're in for the next 2 weeks. And now you're groaning about that because it's like, oh God, I know what this ends in. This is 2 weeks of hell, of you pretending that I'm this terrible ogre just because I was annoyed with you, because you forgot something important. And I'm not. I don't want to be punished like this. So then the whole relationship ends, because I'm not going to put up with this, grow up, da, da, da. But of course, the 5-year-old that has 10 pounds of lifting capacity and has a 400-pound weight on them cannot grow up. They need help to lift the 400-pound weight off or deactivate the trigger. You can do one of the two things. You can stop the trigger. That's the easy thing. In other words, you learn, that particular tone of voice, when you've made a mistake, brings up the terrified 5-year-old that can't get out of that. Okay, I will not use that tone of voice. It's like, thank heavens. Now you've got an adult partner. So now when they forget something, you say, oh, well, that was very irritating. But no harm done. And maybe they can be an adult because you didn't use that tone of voice that was so reminding viscerally. Because remember, in memory, the cues are always corollary. So, you smell new mown grass, and that was the day you saw your mother being raped. So suddenly, and you couldn't deal with it, and it just absolutely drove you crazy. You didn't know what to do. You were terrified. You wet your pants. You're just going crazy, and then you smell new mown grass. And even more, you're getting close to sex with your partner, and you just can't integrate. And you have no idea what's going on because our culture keeps you traumatically illiterate. So this is a really big deal. But it's much more complicated than this, because a particularly upsetting event could activate 5 to 10 ages simultaneously. Meaning if you use that tone of voice, okay, 5-year-old is activated, you look and roll your eyes in a way your 10-year-old felt humiliated by. You tell a friend, oh my gosh, she is such a baby, in a way that humiliated the 14-year-old when your parents did that to you in the same situation. Then you stomp off, which abandons the 2-year-old in the other person. You have just got 400 pounds added at 5 years old. You've got 30 pounds added at 2 years old. You've got 20 pounds added up here at 10 years old. You've got this and that. And every single one of those loads, by definition, is heavier than the adolescent or the child could carry on their own. Meaning the adolescent couldn't deal with public humiliation. An adult can. The adolescent can't. Well, when that's not integrated and the adolescent learns that every time it tells the truth about the humiliation, it gets humiliated for existing, only it's not an adult that's being humiliated for being a 10-year-old. The adult has vanished. It's a 10-year-old humiliated for being a 10-year-old. It's like, grow up. The 10-year-old is shamed and being asked to be a 40-year-old. When you've got multiple years in weights like this, you have to go up and down the ages, untriggering and lifting all of the weights off before you get an adult. Now, this is particularly frustrating in an area of therapeutic negligence, because the whole purpose of a therapist and therapy is to understand, first of all, this metric up and down the age range, to understand that every fixation and every deep compulsive reaction is the phenomena that a 5-year-old feels. It'd be very similar. Just imagine if you wanted some food right now, and the response was a 2-ton chocolate cake that smothered you, that you couldn't eat and you couldn't plow through, and you tried to break yourself off and kick it off of you because it was smothering you. But every time you did that, you saw angry parents, angry giants. We have to replicate the child's experience. You saw angry giants, 200 feet tall, glaring at you and threatening to kill you with their facial irritation. Because that's how a child learns whether they're in a good place or a bad place. They can't talk in many cases, particularly in the pre-verbal states. They look at the face. Is that a face that wants to kill me? Or is that a face that wants to take care of me? Well, the first evidence is they put a 2-ton chocolate cake on your head, which you couldn't lift. Well, that seems like they're trying to kill you, and then they're glaring at you when you get it off. That seems like they want to kill you. And then you scream, and they hit you to tell you to be quiet. Yeah, these people are determined to kill me. I better freeze and do absolutely nothing. So now we've frozen the whole energetic state. You just quietly wait until the rage passes, and you survived. So you survived, you grow to the next age. A 2-ton weight is frozen at 2 years old. So the mechanism of good therapy is to lift these weights off, help them be compartmentalized into specific driving memories at certain times, and most importantly, help the adult up here understand what the child went through, help the child understand that it's not going to happen again, because now there's a new adult in town, the adult, and that It was not their fault, which lifts all the shame off the problems, because parents are constantly blaming their children for their own incompetent parenting, which is a terrible shame because, like, for example, you take any of these weights, you can lift 10 pounds, 5 pounds, a parent gives you a 30-pound weight. You can't lift 30-pound weights. This could be an intensity of hostility. It could be a lie. It could be a betrayal. Whatever it is, it's a 30-pound weight. You can lift 5 or 10. Now the parent shames you with the message that you should be able to lift a 30-pound weight, but you can only lift 5. And secondly, says it's your fault. And thirdly, says they're not going to love you, give you your needs, until you change. This is fear off the charts, way over 10, because the child cannot win. The child is absolutely guaranteed to fail in a paradigm in which they are absolutely dependent on the parent, the abuser, and the parent will punish the child for pointing out this absurdity. It is off the charts. And so nothing but scared, frozen, shut down energy is remotely to be expected from the child. Now, when that scared, shut down energy helps you survive, meaning the parent's rage calms down, you stop saying anything, you just go mute. Maybe the parent pokes at you. Stop being mute. Say something. And you say something, you get hit again or something, and so you realize, I'm just not. You just go mute. And the parent gets bored and says, "Oh, you're full of nothing," and leaves you alone. And you realize, oh, I have to go mute and do absolutely nothing in order to survive and stay alive in this lifetime. And so that's developed as a habit. Well, now anytime you see aggression, first of all, you never grew up because you froze emotionally and you're being mute. And every time you try to talk, it feels like you're going to die. Every time you confront, it feels like you're going to die. And so we have an off-the-chart experience with a learned pattern of survival frozen in place at the weight that it was in place. Because when you ice something, you take a 5-year-old at 5 years old, and then you have them carrying and crushed by a 300-pound weight, and you freeze it, put it in the freezer. Well, when you thaw it out, bring the empathic brain back online, the first thing the empathic brain is going to feel is, oh my God, this weight is so heavy, I can't lift it off. Please help me, please help me, please help me. Now, in an untrained empathic brain, i.e. the typical grown-up in America, when they start to connect with this part of their childhood or this inner part, and they start hearing the screaming, first of all, they're likely to reenact the abuse towards their own child. Why? Well, first of all, it's what their parents did, so it's the unconscious default. Secondly, they don't get this inner distinction in age. That's why I'm drawing attention to it. They don't get the inner distinction in age. And as a result, they're not empathizing with the child that they dissociated with, and they're criticizing themselves, i.e. the child, for not being able to lift the weight off. And they're probably believing the parent's lie that it's the child's fault, saying, oh no, not you again, which is reenacting the shame and the abuse for that young part. Well, this can lead to further dissociation. The child shuts up and freezes again. Now you don't feel it, but that energy is still locked up in that domain. So with that being the case, the weight is even a little bigger. The child again learns that if they talk, they get silenced. So the process is to pull the weight off the child with the authority of the role and the parent. The process is for the guide, the therapist, to go into that with the terrified child and say, that is not your fault. That shouldn't have been put there. This is hurting you. I'm sorry. I see it. I'm going to take it off you. I like you. I want to hear your feelings. You can scream and shout about this if you want. I'd like to hear it, and you don't have to scream and shout. You can just tell me what you were feeling, and I will immediately shift. This is your time. This is about you. And the child can say, oh my goodness. Well, yes, I'm not feeling that way now, but next time my boyfriend shouts at me, I'll feel this all over again because I still have the memory. I still have the memory in the field that happened before. You're not shouting at me, so you're safe, but what about them? What about the next time that trigger is placed? And this requires a ritual enacting because trauma can re-traumatize if it's just looked at directly. You've got to work with it in some kind of art form, drama form, constellation therapy, EMDR. You've got to work with it in some form where it is not continually reenacted. And so this can dissipate the charge in the field and then lead it to integrate into an energy form that is available that then strengthens the adult ego. So this is the goal, is to reclaim pockets of frozen energy, freeing up the energy it takes to freeze, because the refrigeration is coming from the psyche. One part of the psyche is harnessed to refrigerate another part of the psyche that's in pain beyond ability to endure. It's kind of like Novocaine. Someone has to, if you won't fix the tooth for 40 years, someone's got to inject Novocaine every 6 hours in order to keep that aching tooth numb as it continues to infect the rest of the gums and all that. And so this is the high cost of a traumatically illiterate culture. It's the high cost of moving on, not looking back, moving on, the mantra of a shadow of averse culture. So as we move through this period, the needle will come back to mature age. And the ego, as an adult, let's say it has 30 pounds of lift encouraging us towards adulthood. So if we look at this fulcrum here, there's 30 pounds back here, there's a needle here, and all things being equal, we will always be in the present age and the present time. But all things are not equal, meaning, some of us can have 200 separate traumatic events and triggers, none of which are, released, and all of which are waiting to be traumatized. And as such, as such, we're going through life. We've got 30 pounds of pressure in our identity and our sense of adulthood holding us up at our present age. But we're coming along and, that tone of voice comes down and there's still 400 pounds of pressure to it, so we drop down to 5 years old. There's still a part, maybe an adolescent comes in line and says, okay, I feel emotionally 5 years old, but I'll get through this. So it just works with that, and still puts on a performance. But then maybe something else could knock us down lower and the performance cracks. Now then we're stuck until either we freeze, run, or attack and get through the event and the chemicals lift, and then we kind of slowly come back to the present. Now, the really difficult situations come when we have, one, a triggering person in our life in some way, someone that contains a core trigger. Two, they have no interest in understanding or regulating their impact and dismiss and attack anyone that tries to ask them to do anything differently than what they're doing. And thirdly, regularly triggering us back to a given age proceed to humiliate and add other triggers for the triggered response, the reactivity that comes in with the triggered response. So, for example, a bully who triggers something with a bully, with a shove, and then when we look scared and frozen at 5 years old, then zooms in on the scared frozen part to humiliate and expose that part, then this becomes part of now there's a feeling of being completely trapped and more frozen. And so it just keeps escalating. And the weight, can get off the chart and just shatter the sense of safety and re-traumatize like the original event, to the point where just seeing the bully coming, you have to hurry away. And now seeing other big people, you have to hurry away, or anyone with that tone of voice, and reality becomes smaller and smaller because of these matrices of associations that then stop us growing and being adult selves. Now, it's also just worth referencing that every single child is smaller psychologically and physically than all of the adults around them. The grown-ups, I should say, since we don't raise that many adults in this country, is smaller. Their needs for survival, security, love, and belonging, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, their needs depend on the grown-ups around them. And the child starts expressing parts of who they are, etc., and is watching the facial expressions, the body language, what is attuned, what is attacked, etc., how they are needed, etc., and they're looking to become a shape that will minimize unnecessary suffering and maximize the ability to regulate, to connect with the bigger forms around them. And this can also lead to dissociation, because what happens is this child is surrounded by grown-ups who are just as traumatized as the child. And that, for example, let's say that a mother is terrified of being a bad mom and being hated by everyone. Well, now that she's had a child, if the child wanders off into the bushes, the mother instantly feels like she is a bad mother and is going to be hated and rejected by everyone. But she also feels helpless because the child triggered this, and she can't change the judgmental nature of the people around her. She can't deal with the triggered event because she's emotionally and psychologically illiterate in a traumatically illiterate culture. And so she has no relief from changing the community. She has no relief inside. She feels helpless because the baby wandered off when she looked to do something else for 10 seconds. And now she feels rage at her helplessness. And who does she feel rage at? Well, she feels rage at the entire system. Who is it safe to express rage at? The 2-year-old. And so she may not hit and beat the 2-year-old, but by the time she picks the 2-year-old up, she wants to. And she understands that this is inappropriate. But the 2-year-old sees, I elicit a murderous rage in my mother. There's no language to it. They just know that that's the face that murderous rage makes. And they feel it in the tone. And the whole thing is coincided. And the 2-year-old realizes they can't live and explore because their parent is so fragile psychologically. They can't do anything without feeling like, a complete, helpless wreck. And they're constantly hammering on the child to not do this and not do this. And they're completely incompetent as parents. And so the child is trying to create this adaptive personality to accommodate all of these grown-up children with all of their different trigger points, and learning not to bond emotionally with this person because they can't handle emotional bonding, not to need this person because this person hates their own neediness, and so if the child needs, they hate the child for needing. And the child is going through a maze of this. And all of these people are producing different weights, and the child often is frozen between two big masses, where one wants the child to do this to make the grown-up feel better, and the other wants the child to do this to make the grown-up feel better. And the child has to pick, who's going to hurt me more? Which shape do I take? And in this whole thing, there is a complete dissociation from the authentic self, because the authentic self would never survive this degree of triggered grown-ups with all their various agendas and cultural absurdities. Because the cultural absurdities that the child is being instructed in have very little sanity. We don't do that in this culture. Why? Well, we just don't, and shut the fuck up about it and stop thinking, or I'll hit you. I see. Well, we don't do that in this culture. No, that's not how you talk to them. You talk like this, but that's not how I feel. No, well, we don't care how you feel. You talk like this. So-and-so bought your father a nice drink, and you have to behave like this because their feelings matter more than your feelings. So there's just endless asymmetries and insanities around all of this that creates this completely overwhelming sense for the child. And how do they deal with it? They often just tune out and go insane and just copy and become an unconscious copy, which means that when you have an unconscious copy, as soon as you break any of these bizarre rules that kept you as a child, you get anxious. You start telling your partner, don't do that, my parents won't like it, so-and-so won't like it. And this is the difference between a grown-up and an adult. An adult welcomes who they are into the world and welcomes other people waking up into their authentic self. A grown-up is busy in the pleasing avoidance game that is quite willing to sacrifice happiness, sanity, intelligence, ecology, dignity, etc., just to fit in the template that other people are continuing to project and present on the outside as the cultural norm. The thing to understand with trauma more than anything else is that there is an age regression involved. And the regression relates to a trigger that has a certain amount of weight. It could be 2,000 pounds, it could be 1,000 pounds, it could be 20 pounds. You are not going to get a migration from that age up to the next age where things have been fixated unless you help move the weight. You understand what's causing the weight. What's the trigger point? You stop it. And you get the weight off, and then you try and understand it. Then you help the adult and the young one understand that that's not what's going on here. Hopefully it isn't. If you're being raped and killed, etc., in your current time, you can't do that. You've got a new trauma plus the regression to the old trauma, and it's, again, overwhelming. That if you do not do this, you are going to be dealing with someone in fight, flight, and freeze as a compulsion. And that compulsion is bigger than empathy, which means that your relationship is history. You're dealing with an addict, basically, who cannot move up to respond. That's the essence of an adult, is responsibility, the ability to respond to the moment in the present in a way that is rational with the present. Responsibility is the distinction that creates adulthood. So in this framework, if you want an adult or you want to be an adult, it's a process of lessening the charges, releasing the charges, turning the freezer off one area after another, going in there, grieving, understanding what it's like to empathize with that child, being the adult that child never had or didn't have at that moment. I mean, if an older sibling bullies the hell out of you as soon as your parents aren't there and then lies about it, and your parents doesn't want to understand that they've got a bully for an older sibling, because if they understood that, they'd understand that they had to protect you. And if they understood they had to protect you and they don't want to make the time to protect you because they're busy protecting a lifestyle that doesn't have time to protect you. Now you're making them look bad to themselves. They don't want to look bad to themselves, so they're not going to acknowledge the obvious truth that you've got a sadistic older brother. And as a result, you are left alone in the knowledge that your parents are angry at you if you tell about the older brother's abuse, because they don't want to be angry at themselves and they don't want to change. So now your truth becomes the enemy of the parent, who will only love and dote on you for telling a lie that your brother didn't abuse you. And your brother, of course, lies about that. So everyone's happy. The parent gets to maintain the status quo of the lifestyle that they think they want for whatever reason. The older brother gets to enact the cruelty that was done to them by the parent onto the younger brother to make them feel a little bit less envious and more equal in the value hierarchy. Meaning when an older brother gets severely abused by a parent and the younger brother is still somewhat innocent and happy, the message the older brother gets is that it's okay for him to be happy because he's valuable. I'm miserable, and I've been not getting what I needed my entire life and feeling rage about that. I have no value and clout in this family. If I express my rage, my father hates me and beats me and punishes me, so I can't express my rage. I have no value in this fucking household, and I am going to attack that younger brother till he feels the same way I do, because then at least I don't feel like it's uniquely me, that I'm the only one who has no value. Dad has value, mom has value, my younger sibling has no value, that younger sibling has no value, I have no value, and and there's no way to express that because my parents are filled with lies and hypocrisies and will punish me for pointing that out. Well, that's a classic, intergenerational cycle where if that person grows up and this didn't get integrated and understood that child should never have been treated that way, then you have massive abuse later on. To the next generation, where the parent doesn't want to change their lifestyle, which of course brings us back to the fact that we have a lifestyle presently in the modern world, just whatever's happening right now in the culture, that is profoundly traumatic and dishonoring of large sections of the psyche for our younger generation. And we do not, as a culture, want to change the lifestyle of addictive consumerism in order to respond to the fact that we are starving a large part of the psyche within the childhood region. So the intelligent response to this for now is simply to accept that you and the people you are dealing with are going to have different emotional ages in any given moment. To get good at speaking and saying, hey, I'm 5 years old right now and I'm absolutely terrified and I desperately need a cuddle. Well, that's an easy response if someone wants ease. If someone wants to make things really difficult, they can shame the 5-year-old and say, well, you shouldn't be a 5-year-old. Why don't you grow up? Stop being a sissy. Refuse to give you a cuddle. You'll then dissociate, and that explosive energy will lash out and ruin the relationship a week or so down the road. But if they say, great, thank you for knowing your age. Thank you for knowing what that age needs. Thank you for telling me rather than exploding at me. And I would be delighted to cuddle your 5-year-old. Anything else? Don't let go. Don't let go. I'm afraid someone's going to... Very good. You listen to my 5-year-old. My 5-year-old feels important. My 5-year-old feels safe. And he's ready to let me be an adult again. And so here we are. It's very effective, very responsible. Meaning if you are able to understand this paradigm, and you are willing to understand this paradigm, and you are able and willing to love yourself and your partner enough to engage in this paradigm, a magical flow emerges that bypasses so many of the crusty, frozen, hostile, deteriorated shells of a relationship that has no soul, no vitality, particularly from the innocence of the younger self.